They say you never really know someone until the worst happens. For me, that moment came when the doctor said the word malignant, and my husband of 12 years said he needed space. What followed was a battle for my life on two fronts, against an aggressive cancer and against the betrayal that threatened to break me. But when Marcus returned from his business trip with a tan and guilty eyes, he found more than just an empty house. He found consequences. This is my story of survival, justice, and rebuilding from ashes. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning everything changed like any other Tuesday. I remember how the April sunshine streamed through our kitchen windows as I poured my coffee, illuminating the dust particles that danced in the air. Marcus was running late for work as usual, his tall frame rushing around our suburban home, searching for his wallet and keys. "Olivia, have you seen my blue tie? The Hendersons are coming in for the Thompson portfolio review, and Bill loves that tie," Marcus called from upstairs. "Check the laundry room," I replied, a dull ache spreading across my right side. The pain had been getting worse for weeks, but I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Stress, perhaps. Or maybe I'd pulled something at my Pilates class. Marcus descended the stairs, now fully dressed in his tailored navy suit, the blue tie knotted perfectly at his neck. At 42, he still looked every bit the handsome college quarterback I'd fallen for at Northeastern. His dark hair now had distinguished flecks of gray at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but they only added to his charm. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my wince as I shifted in my chair. "You've been holding your side a lot lately." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just slept wrong." Marcus kissed my forehead, his expensive cologne lingering in the air. "Call Dr. Peterson if it gets worse. I've got back-to-back meetings until 7, but I'll pick up dinner on the way home." I nodded, watching him grab his briefcase and head out the door. Neither of us knew it then, but that ordinary conversation would be the last normal moment we'd share. 3 hours later, I was sitting in Dr. Peterson's office, clutching the edge of the examination table as she pointed to shadows on my scan. "That shouldn't have been there." "I'm referring you to an oncologist, Olivia. Dr. Ramirez is the best in Connecticut. I've already called his office, and they're expecting you this afternoon." The word oncologist hung in the air between us like a physical threat. Cancer. She wasn't saying it yet, but we both knew. "Should I call Marcus?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Dr. Peterson hesitated. "Do you want him there? This is just a preliminary consultation." Did I? Marcus and I had been married for 12 years, built our life in Westchester together, renovated our colonial home room by room. He'd held my hand through my father's funeral and celebrated every promotion at his investment firm. Of course, I wanted him there, but something made me hesitate. "No," I decided. "I'll wait until we know more." By evening, I knew enough. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. Aggressive. Treatment needed to begin immediately. Surgery, followed by chemotherapy. My prognosis was cautiously optimistic, Dr. Ramirez had said, but the road ahead would be brutal. I drove home in a daze, the trees along our street a blur of spring green. How do you tell your husband that your life together is about to implode? That the dreams you shared, the vacation house on Cape Cod, the early retirement to travel the world, might never happen? Marcus wasn't home when I arrived. I checked my phone and found a text. "Meeting running late, don't wait up." I sat at our kitchen island, staring at the granite countertop we'd splurged on during the renovation. The house was too quiet. We'd always talked about having children, but our careers had taken precedence. Now, I wondered if that choice had been a mistake. When Marcus finally came home after midnight, I was still sitting in the same spot. "Olivia? Why are you sitting in the dark?" I looked up at him, trying to memorize his face at this moment, before everything changed. "I need to tell you something." His expression shifted, a flicker of something, guilt, crossing his features before settling into concern. He set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. What's wrong? I went to see Dr. Peterson today. She sent me to an oncologist. Marcus froze. An oncologist? Why? I have cancer, Marcus. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. The words hung between us like a physical barrier. Marcus crossed the kitchen slowly and sat on the stool beside me. He didn't reach for my hand. Are they sure? He asked. I nodded. Surgery is scheduled for next week, then chemotherapy. How long will treatment last? Months, maybe a year. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, missing the perfectly styled waves. A year, he repeated. Not, we'll get through this, or I'm here for you. Just a year, as if calculating the inconvenience. That should have been my first warning. The next few days passed in a blur of medical appointments and insurance paperwork. Marcus was physically present, but emotionally distant. He'd ask mechanical questions about treatment schedules and medication costs, but avoided any conversation about how I was feeling or what I was afraid of. The night before my surgery, I found him in his home office, the door nearly closed. His voice was low, intimate. I can't talk right now, he was saying. Yes, I know. I will. I promise. Soon. When I pushed the door open, he ended the call abruptly. Just work, he explained, not meeting my eyes. I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. Because the alternative, that my husband was pulling away exactly when I needed him most, was too painful to consider. The surgery was successful, Dr. Ramirez told me when I woke up. They'd removed the visible tumors, but the cancer had spread. More than they'd anticipated. Chemotherapy would begin as soon as I recovered from surgery. Marcus visited briefly, bringing flowers that the nurse arranged in a vase. He looked uncomfortable in the hospital room, checking his watch repeatedly. The Henderson account is in crisis, he explained. I need to get back to the office. On Saturday? I asked. The markets don't care what day it is, he replied with a tight smile. I'll check on you tomorrow. My college roommate, Tessa Reynolds, arrived an hour after Marcus left. She took one look at me and climbed into the hospital bed, careful of my IVs and surgical drains. Tessa had flown in from Seattle as soon as I'd called her. Where's Marcus? She asked. Her directness, one of the qualities I'd always loved about her. Work emergency. Even to my own ears, the excuse sounded hollow. Tessa's eyebrows rose, but she didn't push. Instead, she pulled out her iPad and showed me the schedule she'd created. I've taken a leave of absence. 3 months. Non-negotiable. I'm staying in your guest room and driving you to every appointment. Tears filled my eyes. Tessa, you can't. Already done, she said firmly. My boss is a cancer survivor. She authorized it immediately. Tessa kept her word. When I was discharged from the hospital, she had transformed our guest room into her command center, with color-coded calendars of my treatments, medication schedules, and nutrition plans. Marcus seemed relieved by her presence, using it as an excuse to work longer hours. You're in good hands with Tessa, he'd say, kissing my forehead before disappearing into his office or heading to another late meeting. 2 weeks after my surgery, I started chemotherapy. The effects were immediate and brutal. My body, already weakened from surgery, rebelled against the poison being pumped into my veins to save me. I spent hours vomiting, my skin taking on a gray pallor, my hair beginning to fall out in clumps. Through it all, Tessa was my rock. She held cold compresses to my forehead, researched anti-nausea remedies, and made me protein smoothies when nothing else would stay down. Marcus, meanwhile, grew increasingly distant. I'm looking at a major opportunity, he announced one evening as Tessa helped me to the couch. The firm is considering me for a partner. That's great, I managed, fighting a wave of nausea. It would mean more responsibility. More travel, he continued, not quite meeting my eyes. Tessa's gaze sharpened. Travel? Now? Marcus shrugged. Business doesn't stop because of personal issues. Personal issues. That's what my cancer had become to him. An inconvenience, a disruption to his career trajectory. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The next day, while Marcus was at work, Tessa helped me shower. As she gently washed my back, she spoke carefully. Liv, has Marcus been acting strange lately, before the diagnosis? I closed my eyes, letting the warm water soothe my aching body. What do you mean? Late nights, secretive phone calls, weekend work emergencies. He's always been ambitious, I defended weakly. Tessa was quiet for a moment. My ex-husband gave the same excuses when he was seeing his dental hygienist. The suggestion should have angered me, but instead, it settled in my chest with the weight of recognition. Hadn't I sensed something was off? The password on his phone that hadn't been there before. The business trips that seemed to multiply. The way he angled his computer screen away when I entered the room. He wouldn't, I whispered. Not now. Tessa helped me from the shower, wrapping me in a plush towel. I hope I'm wrong, she said. I really do. That night, I couldn't sleep. Marcus was working late again. At 2 a.m., I went to his office, driven by an impulse I couldn't name. His computer was there, closed, but not powered down. We knew each other's passwords, or at least, we used to. I typed in his usual combination. Our anniversary date followed by his mother's maiden name. Access denied. I tried again. Nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed a yellow sticky note partly hidden under his keyboard. A series of numbers and letters that looked like a password. My hand shook as I typed it in. The screen unlocked, revealing his email. I hesitated. The wrongness of invading his privacy warring with my growing suspicion. Then I saw it. An email. Thread with the subject line, Cabo Reservation Confirmation. Marcus wasn't scheduled for any business in Cabo San Lucas. I clicked on the email. It was a confirmation for a beachfront villa, reserved for next month, the very week my second round of chemotherapy was scheduled to begin. The reservation was for 2 people, Marcus Wilson and Adrienne Taylor. The name hit me like a physical blow. Adrienne Taylor, the new marketing director at his firm, the woman he'd mentioned hiring 6 months ago, whose name had begun to pepper his work stories with increasing frequency. I scrolled through more emails, each one more damning than the last. Dinner reservations, hotel confirmations in Boston, and Philadelphia on weekends he'd claimed to be working. Intimate exchanges about our time and counting the days. I must have made a sound because Tessa appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. Liv? What are you doing? I couldn't speak. I just turned the screen toward her. Tessa read quickly, her expression hardening. That son of a bitch, she whispered. Liv, I'm so sorry. We stayed up the rest of the night, piecing together the timeline of my husband's betrayal. It had started at least 4 months ago, well before my diagnosis. But instead of ending the affair when I fell ill, Marcus had intensified it, using my cancer as cover for his absences. And now, he was planning to abandon me during my second round of chemo, the round my doctors had warned would be the hardest, for a romantic getaway with his mistress. What are you going to do? Tessa asked as the dawn light began to filter through the windows. I looked down at my thin body, the port visible beneath my collarbone where the chemotherapy drugs entered my bloodstream. I'd lost 15 pounds and most of my hair. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and my skin had a waxy quality that no amount of moisturizer could fix. But in that moment, something hardened inside me. A resolve that had nothing to do with my physical state. First, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks, I'm going to finish this treatment cycle. Then I'm going to talk to a lawyer. Tessa nodded slowly. And Marcus? A cold smile crossed my face. He can have his vacation, but he might find the homecoming a bit different than he expects. The next morning, when Marcus emerged from our bedroom, in his crisp suit, I was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly sipping tea. I'd erased all evidence of my night's discovery. "You're up early," he remarked, pouring himself coffee. "Feeling better?" "Much," I lied. "In fact, I think Tessa could use a break. Why don't you stay home today? We could watch that series we've been meaning to start." Marcus's expression flickered with panic. "I can't live. The Henderson portfolio is doing fine." I finished for him. "You said so yourself last week." He busied himself with his coffee, avoiding my gaze. "There are other accounts. The Taylor project is in a critical phase." The Taylor project. The audacity nearly made me laugh. "Of course," I said softly. "The Taylor project needs your personal attention." If he caught my emphasis, he didn't show it. "I'll try to be home for dinner," he promised, the lie coming easily to him now. I nodded, watching him gather his things. As he headed for the door, I called after him, "Marcus, I love you." He hesitated, guilt shadowing his features before he mustered a smile. "Love you too." The door closed behind him, and I turned to find Tessa watching from the hallway. "You're not going to confront him?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet. First, I need to secure my future." That afternoon, despite the fatigue pulling at my bones, I made 2 appointments. One with my oncologist to discuss adjusting my treatment schedule, and another with Catherine Davis, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Westchester County. Catherine Davis's office was located in a converted Victorian mansion in the heart of White Plains, its elegant exterior masking the fierce legal battles strategized within. I sat across from her, my headscarf neatly arranged to hide my thinning hair, as she reviewed the evidence Tessa had helped me compile. "This is quite the paper trail," Catherine said, her immaculately manicured nails tapping against printouts of Marcus's emails and credit card statements. At 55, she had the sharp, assessing gaze of someone who'd seen every possible way a marriage could implode. "He's been careless. Arrogant," I corrected. "He doesn't think I have the energy to notice, much less do anything about it." Catherine nodded, her silver bob swinging with the movement. "Men like your husband often underestimate women in vulnerable positions. It gives us an advantage." She laid out my options with clinical precision. Connecticut was an equitable distribution. State, our assets would be divided fairly, though not necessarily equally. The fact that Marcus was having an affair while I battled cancer wouldn't automatically entitle me to more, but it could influence a judge. "What about our accounts?" I asked. "We have joint savings, investment portfolios, retirement funds." Catherine's smile was razor-thin. "As his wife, you currently have every legal right to access joint accounts. Once divorce proceedings begin, that changes. Financial moves made before filing can be scrutinized but are often perfectly legal." I understood her implicit suggestion. "And if he's planning to leave me at my most vulnerable, then protecting yourself isn't just advisable, it's necessary." She leaned forward. "How much do you know about your financial situation, Mrs. Wilson?" The question stung more than it should have. I'd been a marketing executive before scaling back to consulting work 3 years ago. I'd always prided myself on my independence, yet I'd gradually ceded financial oversight to Marcus, trusting his expertise as an investment manager. "Not enough," I admitted, "but I'm a quick study." Over the next week, between bouts of nausea and bone-deep fatigue from my treatments, I became an investigator of my own life. Tessa helped me compile statements, track down account numbers, and piece together a comprehensive picture of our financial entanglement. What emerged was troubling. While our household accounts appeared healthy, Marcus had been systematically moving funds into separate accounts over the past 6 months, coinciding with the beginning of his affair. Small amounts, Nothing suspicious enough to trigger my attention, but substantial in aggregate. He's building a nest egg, Tessa said grimly as we sat at my kitchen island, spreadsheets scattered around us. Planning his exit strategy. The realization should have devastated me. Instead, it crystallized my resolve. If Marcus was preparing to leave me financially vulnerable while I fought for my life, I would not go quietly. I made an appointment with our bank under the guise of updating my information, due to my illness. The sympathy in the manager's eyes when he saw my headscarf and gaunt frame made what came next easier. I'd like to review all our joint accounts and make sure I have proper access, I explained. My treatments make it difficult to predict when I'll be well enough to handle finances, and I want to be prepared. No one questioned my motives as I systematically ensured I had online access, checkbooks, and debit cards for every account. Next came our investment portfolio, a more complex web that required Marcus's passwords, which I now had. During this financial reconnaissance, Marcus continued his charade of the concerned husband, stopping home between meetings to check on me before disappearing again. Each time, his performances grew more elaborate, bringing my favorite soup, asking detailed questions about my medications, while his eyes darted to his watch, calculating the minutes until he could escape. 2 weeks after my meeting with Catherine, Marcus announced his business trip over dinner. The firm needs me in Chicago for the Thompson merger, he said, pushing food around his plate. I'll be gone for 10 days. Chicago. Not Cabo San Lucas. The lie came so easily to him now. 10 days? I echoed, injecting concern into my voice. That seems long for a merger meeting. There are complications, he explained vaguely. The stakeholders are demanding in-person negotiations. Beside me, Tessa stiffened but remained silent, her fork gripped tightly. When do you leave? I asked. Sunday. 3 days from now, the day before my second round of chemotherapy was scheduled to begin. I've arranged for Mom to come stay, he continued, not meeting my eyes. She'll be here Sunday afternoon. His mother, Eleanor Wilson, was a 70-year-old woman with mobility issues who needed more care than she could provide. It was a callous solution that served only to assuage his guilt. That's not necessary, I said calmly. Tessa will be here, and I've joined a support group. We have a system in place. Relief flooded his features, quickly masked with concern. Are you sure? I can postpone if... Go, I cut him off. Your career is important. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. That night, I called Dr. Ramirez's office and rescheduled my chemotherapy for the following week. Then I called Catherine Davis. It's time, I told her. He's leaving Sunday for a 10-day business trip with his mistress. Perfect, Catherine replied. That gives us the window we need. Can you come in tomorrow? Bring all the documentation we discussed. Saturday morning, while Marcus was supposedly at the gym, I met with Catherine and her financial investigator, a former forensic accountant named Michael Reeves. Together, we finalized my strategy. Remember, Catherine cautioned, we're not doing anything illegal. You're protecting assets you have every right to access as his spouse. Once you file for divorce, the court will determine the final distribution. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. I understand the boundaries. That evening, I played the role of a devoted wife one last time. I prepared Marcus's favorite meal, steak with roasted potatoes and asparagus, and wore the silk robe he'd given me last Christmas before my body had been ravaged by disease and treatment. What's the occasion? He asked, surprised by the effort. I wanted to give you a proper send-off, I said, pouring him wine I couldn't drink due to my medications. I know how important this trip is for your career. Guilt flickered across his face, quickly replaced by the practiced mask of concern he'd perfected. Liv, if you need me to stay, I'll be fine, I assured him, raising my water glass. To your success. He touched his wine glass to mine, relief evident in the loosening. of his shoulders. We talked about inconsequential things, a movie he wanted to see, plans for the garden this summer, maintaining the fiction of our marriage for one final evening. As he packed that night, I watched from the doorway of our bedroom, memorizing the routine domesticity of the scene. Once, I had found comfort in these moments. Now, they felt like scenes from a play where both actors had forgotten their lines but continued the performance anyway. "Call me when you land?" I asked as he zipped his suitcase closed. "Of course," he promised, not looking up. Another lie to add to the growing collection. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Marcus's flight was at noon, and he'd arranged for a car service to take him to the airport. I stood on our front porch, wrapped in a cardigan against the spring chill, and waved as the black sedan pulled away. He didn't look back. The moment the car turned the corner, Tessa emerged from the house behind me. "Ready?" she asked. I took a deep breath, feeling more awake and purposeful than I had in months. Ready. We spent Sunday executing the first phase of our plan. I transferred funds from our joint savings account, the one Marcus had been steadily depleting, into a new account Catherine had helped me establish. Not everything, but enough to ensure I wouldn't be left destitute. Next came the investment accounts. Following Michael Reeves's instructions, I liquidated select portions of our portfolio, careful to avoid tax penalties or suspicious patterns that might trigger automatic alerts. By Monday morning, I had secured approximately half of our liquid assets, a fair share by any measure and less than I was legally entitled to. The remainder stayed untouched, awaiting the formal divorce proceedings that would follow. "He's landed," Tessa announced, showing me the flight tracker on her phone. "Should be checking into the Thompson merger right about now." I smiled grimly. Let's give him a day to settle in. While Marcus began his romantic getaway, I focused on gathering strength for what lay ahead. The postponed chemotherapy gave me a precious week of relative physical wellness, the calm before the next storm of treatment. I used this time to meet with a real estate agent recommended by Catherine. Our house, with its meticulous renovation and desirable location, was our largest asset. While I couldn't sell it without Marcus's consent, I could explore its value and potential. "The market in this area is surprisingly strong," Lisa Chen explained as she walked through our home, making notes on her tablet. "Even with minimal updates, you're looking at a substantial profit over your purchase price." I followed her from room to room, seeing our house through new eyes. The kitchen where I'd received my diagnosis. The bedroom where Marcus had gradually moved to his side, creating a physical chasm that mirrored our emotional one. The office where he'd conducted his betrayal. "I'd prefer not to live here during the showing process," I told Lisa. "Can we discuss timing options?" By Wednesday, Marcus had settled into his routine of performative concern. He called each evening, asking about my non-existent treatments, offering shallow sympathy about side effects I wasn't currently experiencing. "Chicago is brutal this time of year," he complained during one call. "Windy and cold." I pulled up the weather report for Cabo San Lucas on my laptop, 85 degrees and sunny, and smiled into the phone. "That sounds tough. Are the meetings going well at least?" "Endless negotiations," he sighed. "The Thompson team is being difficult about valuation terms." "I'm sure you'll win them over," I replied, scrolling through the resort's Instagram feed, where a recent post showed the exact beachfront villa detailed in his reservation confirmation. "You've always been persuasive." On Thursday, Catherine filed the divorce papers. By Connecticut law, Marcus would be served within 30 days, though Catherine had arranged for expedited service. His notification would be waiting when he returned from Chicago. That same day, I met with Dr. Ramirez to discuss the next phase of my treatment. "Your blood work is showing improvement," he said, reviewing my charts. "The first round did exactly what we hoped. This next cycle will be more aggressive, but I believe you're strong enough to handle it." I thought about the strength I'd discovered within myself over the past weeks. Not physical, but something deeper and more resilient. I'm ready, I told him. Friday morning, I received a text from Marcus. Miss you. Can't wait to be home next week. Thinking of you during your treatment. Today. I showed it to Tessa, who rolled her eyes. The treatment he thinks you're having right now? While he's sipping margaritas on the beach with her? His concern is touching, I replied dryly. That afternoon, we executed the final phase of our financial plan. Following Michael's guidance, I transferred funds from our joint checking account, leaving enough to cover outstanding bills, and closed the credit cards where I was listed as an authorized user rather than the primary account holder. He'll notice this, Tessa warned as we completed the transactions. That's the point, I replied. But not until he gets back. The weekend passed in a blur of preparations. I donated Marcus's designer clothes to a local charity that supported cancer patients' families. I rearranged the furniture, removing his presence from our shared spaces one piece at a time. On Sunday, exactly 1 week after Marcus had left for his business trip, I stood in our bedroom, now my bedroom, and surveyed my handiwork. His closet was empty, the contents either donated or packed into boxes now stored in the garage. His toiletries were gone from the bathroom, his books removed from the nightstand. I'd replaced our wedding photo with a print Tessa had given me years ago, a watercolor of the Maine coastline where we'd vacationed in college. The physical erasure of Marcus from our home mirrored the excision of the cancer from my body, painful but necessary for survival. Monday brought 2 significant events: the beginning of my second round of chemotherapy and confirmation that Marcus had been served. Divorce papers at his villa in Cabo San Lucas. The process server said he was on the beach with a woman, Catherine reported via phone. They handed him the envelope along with his piña colada. Apparently, his companion was not amused. I smiled weakly, the initial flood of chemotherapy drugs already making my veins burn. Tessa squeezed my hand as I absorbed the news. What happens next? I asked. He has 30 days to respond. Given the circumstances, I expect we'll hear from his attorney much sooner. She was right. The first call came that evening, not from Marcus, but from Bradley Thompson, his longtime friend and attorney. Olivia, Bradley began, his professional tone unable to completely mask his discomfort. I'm calling to discuss the divorce filing and your financial activities of the past week. You should speak with my attorney, I replied calmly. Catherine Davis. I believe you have her contact information from the filing. Olivia. Be reasonable. He attempted, his voice taking on a cajoling tone. These actions, emptying accounts, closing credit lines, they don't reflect well on you. Marcus is concerned. About his finances? Yes, I imagine he is. I kept my voice level despite the nausea building from my treatment. Again, please direct all communication to Catherine. He's on his way home, Bradley continued, ignoring my request. He wants to talk, to understand what's happened. I'm sure Adrienne can explain it to him, I replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm recovering from chemotherapy. The treatment. Your client abandoned me during vacation with his mistress. I ended the call and turned to Tessa, who had been listening from the doorway of my bedroom, where I was resting after treatment. Round 1, she said with a grim smile. Of many, I agreed, closing my eyes against the room's spinning. He'll be back tomorrow. Are you sure you don't want me to change the locks? Tessa asked, concerned. I shook my head. Not yet. Let him see what's waiting for him first. Tuesday morning, as predicted, Marcus's key turned in our front door. I was sitting in the living room, wrapped in a blanket despite the spring warmth, my body still reeling from yesterday's treatment. Tessa stood nearby, arms crossed, a sentinel against the coming storm. Olivia? Marcus's voice called out, confusion evident in his tone. What's going on? Where's my... He appeared in the living room doorway, stopping short at the sight of me. His tan contrasted sharply with the shock on his face, his designer sunglasses pushed up into hair still damp from what I assumed was a hurried shower after his flight. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the room, me, pale and diminished by illness but somehow larger in my newfound purpose. Him, healthy and handsome but suddenly small in his deception. "Welcome home," I said quietly. "How was Chicago?" Marcus stepped into the living room, his confident stride faltering as he took in the changes to our home. His gaze darted from the rearranged furniture to the bare walls where his business awards had once hung, finally settling on me with something between confusion and outrage. "What have you done?" he demanded, dropping his carry-on bag to the floor. I regarded him calmly, pushing aside the wave of nausea that threatened to overtake me. "I've been busy while you were in Chicago, though I suspect Cabo San Lucas kept you quite occupied as well." The color drained from his face. "Olivia—" "Save it," Tessa interjected, stepping forward. "We've seen the emails, the credit card statements, the resort bookings, all of it." Marcus's jaw tightened as he glanced between us. "You went through my personal accounts? That's an invasion of privacy." A laugh escaped me, sharp and brittle. "Privacy? You want to talk about privacy while you were sharing a beachfront villa with Adrienne Taylor during my cancer treatment?" "It's not what you think," he began, falling back on the oldest cliché in the cheater's handbook. "It's exactly what I think," I countered. "You've been sleeping with her for months, planning your exit strategy while I was fighting for my life." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly calculating his next move. Marcus had always been strategic, able to pivot when cornered. It was what made him successful in business, and apparently in deception. "Olivia, I know you're upset, and you have every right to be," he said, his voice softening into the conciliatory tone he used with difficult clients. "But these financial moves, emptying our accounts, liquidating investments, that's going too far. We need to talk rationally about this." "Rationally?" I echoed. "Like how you rationally decided to take your girlfriend on vacation while your wife was scheduled for chemotherapy?" "It wasn't planned that way," he insisted, taking a step toward me. "The timing was unfortunate." "Unfortunate," I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "Is that what you call abandoning your sick wife? An unfortunate scheduling conflict?" Tessa moved to stand between us, her protective instinct palpable. "I think you should leave, Marcus. Olivia had her second round of chemo yesterday. The treatment you were supposedly so concerned about while texting from the beach." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of genuine remorse, quickly subsumed by self-preservation. "This is my house too," he said, his voice hardening. "And those were our joint accounts you raided. Bradley tells me you've taken nearly $500,000. "Half of what was rightfully mine," I corrected. "Catherine advised me quite carefully on the legal boundaries." "Catherine Davis," he spat the name. "Bradley warned me about her. She's a piranha." "She's effective," I countered, "and she's just getting started." Marcus paced the room, agitation evident in every movement. The confident man who'd left for his secret vacation had been replaced by someone scrambling to regain control. "We can fix this," he said finally, turning to face me. "I made a terrible mistake, Liv. I got scared when you got sick. I didn't know how to handle it, and I made a series of bad decisions." For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd championed my career even when it meant sacrificing opportunities for his own. What had happened to that man? Has he ever really existed? "It wasn't fear that drove you into another woman's bed," I said quietly. "It was selfishness, and it started long before my diagnosis." He didn't deny it, which was perhaps the only honest thing he'd done in months. "I'll end it with Adrienne," he offered, as if this concession should inspire gratitude. "We can go to counseling, start fresh. While I continue chemo? While I fight to survive?" I shook my head. No, Marcus. There's no starting fresh from this. His expression hardened. Is this about money? Is that what this elaborate setup is about? Because if it is… Get out, Tessa interrupted, her patience visibly at an end. Now. Marcus ignored her, his focus entirely on me. Olivia, be reasonable. You're ill. You need support, financial security. Don't throw away 12 years over one mistake. Multiple mistakes, I corrected. Ongoing deliberate choices to betray me at my most vulnerable. And as for support, I gestured to Tessa. I have more genuine support than you've offered in months. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if my body hadn't chosen that moment to rebel. The nausea that had been threatening since Marcus arrived suddenly became overwhelming. I lurched forward, barely reaching the decorative bowl on the coffee table before emptying the meager contents of my stomach. Marcus stepped back, his disgust poorly concealed. It was, in its way, the most honest reaction he'd had, revealing his true feelings about my illness more clearly than any words could have. Tessa was beside me in an instant, holding my shoulders, murmuring soothing words as the spasms subsided. You need to rest, she said, helping me back against the cushions and handing me a tissue. And you, she added, turning to Marcus, need to leave. Now. This time, perhaps chastened by the visceral reminder of my condition, Marcus didn't argue. We'll continue this discussion when you're feeling better, he said, backing toward the door. And Olivia, I expect access to at least some of our accounts restored by the end of the day. After he left, silence settled over the room. Tessa brought me water and anti-nausea medication, her movements efficient and caring. He doesn't get it, she said finally. He still thinks this is a negotiation. I swallowed the pills, grateful for the momentary distraction from the bitter taste in my mouth. He's used to controlling the narrative. That's about to change. True to his word, Marcus returned the next day. This time, he came bearing peace offerings, ginger tea for my nausea, a cashmere throw blanket in my favorite shade of blue, and a folder of printed materials about marriage counselors specializing in cancer support. I accepted the tea but left the other items untouched on the coffee table between us. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, perching on the edge of the armchair opposite mine. He'd dressed carefully for this meeting, the charcoal suit I'd always liked, his Harvard tie, freshly polished shoes. The corporate warrior, prepared for a difficult but ultimately winnable negotiation. And, I prompted when he paused, you're right that what I did was inexcusable. There's no justification for my behavior. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. But, Olivia, we built a life together. 12 years. That has to count for something. It counted for so little that you were willing to throw it away for a fling with your marketing director. He winced. It wasn't just a fling. I was lost, confused. When you got sick… Stop, I interrupted. My cancer didn't cause your affair. It was well underway before my diagnosis. You just used my illness as cover for your absences. Marcus had the grace to look ashamed. I handled everything badly, but I want to make it right. I studied him, trying to see past the practiced contrition to whatever truth might lie beneath. Why? Why now, Marcus? Is it the money? Of course not, he protested, though his gaze flickered momentarily. It's us. What we had. What we could. Still have. And Adrienne? His hesitation told me everything. It's over, he said finally. I ended it when I got the divorce papers. Not before. Only when he realized there would be consequences. I spoke with Dr. Ramirez this morning, I said, changing tack. He's pleased with how I'm responding to treatment. Marcus blinked at the sudden shift. That's wonderful news, Liv. He estimates another 4 months of chemo, possibly followed by radiation. The prognosis is cautiously optimistic. I'll be with you every step, Marcus promised, reaching for my hand. I pulled back before he could touch me. No, you won't. Because I don't trust you, Marcus, and I can't fight cancer while also fighting to believe in my husband. His expression hardened slightly. This is Catherine Davis talking. She's poisoned you against reconciliation because divorced clients are more profitable. Actually, she advised me to consider all options carefully, I countered. The decision is entirely mine. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, spring was in full bloom, the cherry tree we'd planted on our 5th anniversary heavy with pink blossoms. What will it take? He asked, his back to me. To fix this. To make you reconsider the divorce. The question hung between us, weighted with everything unspoken. What would it take? Could anything undo the betrayal, the abandonment, the casual cruelty of his choices? Time travel, I said finally. A way to go back and unsee you for who you really are. He turned, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. That's not fair. People make mistakes, Olivia. They deserve second chances. Some mistakes can't be undone, I replied. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. The conversation circled for another hour, Marcus alternating between contrition and barely concealed frustration. He made promises, offered compromises, even suggested we bring in a mediator instead of proceeding with attorneys. I listened, nodded at appropriate intervals, but my decision had been made long before he returned from Cabo. Perhaps even in that first moment when I'd found the emails confirming what my heart had already suspected. I need to rest now, I said finally, genuinely exhausted by the emotional drain of his presence. We can talk more tomorrow. He left reluctantly, extracting a promise that I would think about everything overnight. I agreed, knowing it would give me blessed hours of peace. The next morning brought unexpected news. Tessa burst into my bedroom, her phone in hand, her expression a mix of disbelief and vindication. You need to see this, she said, perching on the edge of my bed. She handed me her phone, open to a gossip column on the business section of a national news site. The headline made my stomach lurch. Wilson investment scandal. Partner accused of fund mismanagement. Below was a photo of Marcus leaving our house yesterday, his expression captured in an unflattering moment of anger. I scanned the article. Key phrases jumping out at me. Allegations of improper fund allocation. Client complaints dating back 6 months. Internal investigation launched. And most damning, sources close to the firm suggest Wilson may have been diverting client funds for personal use. Did you know about this? Tessa asked as I finished reading. I shook my head, genuinely shocked. No, nothing. The article explained that concerns had been growing within the firm about Marcus's handling of several key accounts, including the Henderson portfolio he'd mentioned so often. Clients had reported discrepancies in their statements, and an internal audit had raised red flags that triggered a formal investigation. This might explain his sudden interest in reconciliation, Tessa observed dryly. If he's about to face financial and legal trouble, having access to your accounts would be convenient. The thought made me feel ill in a way that had nothing to do with chemotherapy. Had Marcus been planning to use our marital assets to cover his professional misconduct? Was that why he'd been so incensed about my financial moves? I called Catherine, immediately. I've seen it, she said before I could even mention the article. My office is already looking into potential implications for your case. Could I be liable? I asked, the thought suddenly occurring to me. If he was mismanaging client funds, that's exactly what we're investigating, Catherine replied. The timing of your financial separations may actually work in your favor. It establishes that you acted independently before any public allegations emerged. After hanging up, I sat in silence, absorbing this new dimension to Marcus's betrayal. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Tessa went to answer it, returning moments later with Eleanor Wilson, Marcus's mother. At 70, Eleanor remained an imposing figure, tall and straight-backed, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her eyes the same piercing blue as her son's. She'd never fully approved of me, viewing my middle-class background and career ambitions with thinly veiled skepticism. "Olivia," she said, approaching my bed with measured steps. "You look unwell." "Chemotherapy will do that," I replied, too tired for pretense. "It's good to see you, Eleanor." She nodded stiffly, perching on the edge of the chair beside my bed. "Marcus called me last night. He's quite distraught." "I imagine the news article this morning didn't help," Tessa remarked from the doorway. Eleanor's gaze flickered. "Financial improprieties can be complex matters, often misrepresented by the media." "And affairs? How are those typically misrepresented?" I asked, unable to contain the bitter edge in my voice. Eleanor's lips thinned. "Marcus has explained the situation to me. He made a terrible error in judgment during an emotionally difficult time. My cancer diagnosis was emotionally difficult. For him," I clarified, wanting to ensure we understood each other perfectly. "For both of you," Eleanor countered. "But families should stand together during crises, not tear each other apart." "I agree," I said quietly. "That's why his choice to vacation with his mistress during my treatment was particularly devastating." Eleanor had the grace to look uncomfortable. "He's prepared to make amends, Olivia. The question is whether you're prepared to let him." "I'm prepared to focus on my recovery," I replied, "which means eliminating sources of stress and betrayal from my life." The older woman sighed, her shoulders drooping slightly. For a moment, I glimpsed something beyond her usual rigid composure. Perhaps worry for her son, or even genuine concern for me. "Marcus may lose everything," she said finally. "His position at the firm, his professional reputation, possibly even face legal charges if these allegations prove true." "That would be unfortunate," I acknowledged. "But they're consequences of his choices, not mine." "He needs support now more than ever," Eleanor persisted. "A united front could make all the difference in how this situation resolves." I understood then what she was really asking. For me to stand beside Marcus publicly, to use our marriage as a shield against the gathering storm of his professional misconduct. To rescue him from the wreckage he'd created while he'd been perfectly willing to abandon me and mine. "I'll always care about what happens to Marcus," I said carefully. "But I won't be his human shield, Eleanor. Not anymore." She rose stiffly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her impeccable linen pants. "I had hoped illness might have softened your stubborn streak, Olivia. Clearly, I was mistaken." After she left, Tessa returned to my side, her expression concerned. "Are you okay?" I leaned back against my pillows, suddenly exhausted by more than just the chemotherapy. "No," I admitted, "but I will be." The next few days brought a flurry of developments. Marcus's firm placed him on administrative leave, pending the outcome of their investigation. 2 financial regulatory bodies announced their own inquiries into his handling of client accounts. The business press, which had once celebrated him as a rising star, now speculated on his potential downfall. Through it all, Marcus continued his campaign for reconciliation, now tinged with increasing desperation. The flowers became more extravagant, the promises more elaborate, the pleas more emotional. "Just until this blows over," he urged during one visit, his designer suit replaced by casual clothes, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. "We present a united front, weather this storm together, then revisit the divorce if that's still what you want." "So I should put my life on hold to help salvage yours?" I asked. "It would help both of us," he insisted. "These allegations could affect our shared assets, our financial future." "My financial future," I corrected. "The divorce will be finalized long before any of these investigations conclude." His expression darkened. You're being vindictive, Olivia. This isn't like you. Perhaps he was right. The woman he'd married, trusting, accommodating, eager to smooth over conflicts, might have relented, might have stood by him despite his betrayal, might have prioritized his needs above her own once again. But cancer and betrayal had forged someone new from those ashes. Someone who recognized the precious value of her remaining time. Someone who understood that survival sometimes required exercising more than just malignant cells. You don't know who I am anymore, I told him. And I'm finally seeing you clearly too. 1 week after Marcus's return from Cabo, I woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. Tessa's firm tone interspersed with a woman's sharper, more agitated one. Wrapping myself in my robe, I made my way carefully down the stairs, pausing at the landing when the unfamiliar voice came into clearer focus. I have every right to speak with her. This concerns me directly. She's recovering from chemotherapy, Tessa countered calmly. Whatever you have to say can be directed to her attorney. I stepped into view, curiosity overcoming my initial instinct to retreat back to the sanctuary of my bedroom. In our foyer stood a woman I recognized immediately. From social media photos and company events, Adrienne Taylor, Marcus's mistress. She was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 30 to my 38, with the polished veneer of someone who invested considerable time and money in her appearance. Shoulder-length blonde hair framed a face beautiful enough to turn heads, but not so striking as to intimidate. In her cream silk blouse and tailored navy pants, she could have stepped from the pages of a business casual lookbook. "Ms. Taylor," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is unexpected." Her eyes widened slightly as she took in my appearance, the headscarf covering my sparse remaining hair, the weight loss that made my robe hang loosely, the pallor that no amount of makeup could disguise. "Mrs. Wilson," she replied, regaining her composure. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I felt we needed to speak directly." Tessa moved to my side, her protective stance unmistakable. "This isn't necessary, Liv. I can ask her to leave." "It's okay," I assured her, then addressed Adrienne. "You can have 15 minutes in the living room." She followed me into the room that had seen so many confrontations lately, perching uncomfortably on the edge of the sofa while I settled into my favorite armchair. Tessa remained standing by the doorway, arms crossed. "I assume this is about Marcus," I began when Adrienne seemed uncertain how to start. She nodded, her manicured fingers twisting in her lap. "Yes, but perhaps not in the way you might think." "You're not here to fight for him?" I couldn't keep the hint of irony from my voice. "God, no!" she said with unexpected vehemence. "I'm here to warn you." That caught me off guard. Whatever scenario I'd imagined for this meeting, it hadn't included warnings from my husband's mistress. "About what?" Adrienne glanced at Tessa before focusing back on me. "About the financial irregularities at the firm. You need to protect yourself. More than you already have." "You know about the investigation?" I asked. "I know it's much worse than what's been reported," she confirmed. "I'm in marketing, but I work closely with the financial team. The discrepancies in Marcus's accounts aren't minor bookkeeping errors. We're talking millions of dollars potentially misappropriated over the past year. The information landed like a physical blow. Millions, not thousands. Deliberate misappropriation, not mismanagement. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, struggling to understand her motives. Adrienne looked down at her hands. "Because I was foolish enough to believe his lies too. About his unhappy marriage. About building a future together. Then I discovered he was doing the same with Sarah in accounting." "There's a third woman?" Tessa interjected, unable to contain her disbelief. Adrienne nodded grimly. "And possibly others. Marcus is pathological in his deceptions." When the Cabo trip ended so abruptly, I started digging. What I found suggested the funds for our romantic getaways weren't coming from his salary. I absorbed this new information, pieces falling into place. The extravagant gifts he'd brought home over the past year. The luxury vacations. The new car he'd insisted on buying despite our perfectly serviceable existing one. "Have you spoken to the investigators?" I asked. "Yesterday," she confirmed. "I've provided everything I know, including text messages where he discussed using client funds for personal expenses." Why come to me now? Adrian met my gaze directly for the first time. Because he's desperate. The firm has frozen his accounts, and legal proceedings are imminent. You should know he's been contacting everyone who might possibly help him, including suggesting to mutual friends that your illness has made you unstable and vindictive. The revelation shouldn't have hurt, but it did. Even now, facing the consequences of his own actions, Marcus was attempting to manipulate the narrative at my expense. "Thank you for telling me," I said after a moment. "I'll speak with my attorney." Adrian rose to leave, then hesitated. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Wilson. I knew he was married, and I pursued the relationship anyway. I told myself his marriage was already over in all but name, that I wasn't really hurting anyone. And now I understand I was just another piece in his game," she said quietly. "One he was willing to sacrifice without a second thought when circumstances changed." After she left, Tessa and I sat in silence, processing this unexpected alliance with the woman who had been, until recently, my nemesis in absentia. "Do you believe her?" Tessa finally asked. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "She has nothing to gain by lying at this point." I called Catherine immediately, relaying everything Adrian had shared. Her response was swift and decisive. "I'm filing emergency motions today," she said. "If Marcus is facing potential criminal charges for financial misconduct, we need to completely sever your financial connections before any assets might be frozen or seized." The remainder of the week passed in a flurry of legal maneuvers and revelations. Catherine's team worked tirelessly to disentangle my financial future from Marcus's potentially criminal past. Adrian, true to her word, provided documentation showing Marcus had used company funds for personal expenses, including our anniversary dinner 6 months ago and the diamond bracelet he'd given me for Christmas, gifts I had believed came from his legitimate income. Through it all, my body continued its own battle. The second round of chemotherapy ravaged me more thoroughly than the first, leaving me exhausted and nauseated for days at a time. There were moments when the combined stress of cancer and chaos threatened to overwhelm me, when I questioned whether I had the strength to fight on multiple fronts. During one particularly difficult night, as Tessa helped me back to bed after hours of sickness, I confessed my darkest fear. What if I've made everything worse? Started a war I'm too weak to finish? Tessa tucked the blankets around me with gentle efficiency. "You didn't start this war, Liv. You're just refusing to be collateral damage in one Marcus created." Her words gave me strength to face the next morning, when Marcus arrived unannounced at our doorstep, his appearance markedly different from his previous visits. Gone were the tailored suits and polished veneer. The man who stood on our porch looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot, his expensive watch noticeably absent. "I need to talk to Olivia," he told Tessa, who had answered the door. "Now isn't a good time," she replied firmly. "It's never a good time anymore," he snapped, his composure fracturing. "But this can't wait." I appeared behind Tessa, drawn by the commotion. "It's okay," I told her. "I can handle this." Marcus followed me to the kitchen, the room where we'd shared thousands of meals and conversations over our years together. It seemed fitting for what I suspected might be one of our last. "You look terrible," he said, then winced at his own tactlessness. I know what you mean," I replied, lowering myself carefully onto a kitchen stool. "Chemo does that. You don't look so great yourself." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Everything's falling apart, Leave. The firm has suspended me without pay. The SEC is investigating. My accounts are frozen. I know, I said simply. Adrienne came to see me? His head snapped up. Adrienne was here? What did she say? Enough, I replied. About the funds you misappropriated. About Sarah in accounting. About how you've been telling people I'm mentally unstable. Marcus paled, caught in lies too numerous to defend. For once, he didn't attempt to spin a counter-narrative. I need money, he said finally, cutting to the chase. Just enough to retain a good defense attorney. I'll pay you back once this is all cleared up. The audacity was almost admirable. Cleared up? I repeated. Marcus, you stole from your clients. Used the money to fund an affair. Multiple affairs, apparently. There's no clearing that up. It's not theft, he insisted, a flash of his old arrogance returning. It's fund reallocation. Temporary. I was going to replace everything once my investments matured. And those investments were. He hesitated, then sighed. Cryptocurrency. Some high-risk tech startups. They didn't pan out as expected. The picture became clearer with each revelation. Marcus hadn't just betrayed me personally. He'd gambled with other people's money, lost, and kept doubling down hoping for a win that never came. I can't help you, I said quietly. Even if I wanted to, Catherine has made sure I legally can't access funds that might be connected to your case. Catherine! He spat the name. She's turned you against me completely. The Olivia I married would never have been this vindictive. The Olivia you married trusted you completely, I countered. She learned better. Marcus paced the kitchen, desperation emanating from him like a physical force. What am I supposed to do? My attorney dropped me when I couldn't pay his retainer. My bank accounts are frozen. My credit cards are maxed out. I'm sleeping on Bradley's couch because I can't even afford a hotel. For a moment, I felt an echo of the compassion that had once defined our relationship. Despite everything, this man had been my partner for 12 years. I had loved him, built dreams with him, imagined growing old together. I'm sorry you're in this situation, I said sincerely. But I can't risk what little security I've managed to salvage. I'm facing prison, Olivia, he said, his voice breaking. Actual prison. While you're sitting here in our home with access to funds that should rightfully be half mine. Should have been, I corrected, before you decided to commit what sounds increasingly like fraud. He slammed his hand down on the counter, frustration boiling over. Damn it, Olivia. I made mistakes. Yes, terrible ones. But you're acting like I'm some monster who deserves no compassion, no second chance. Second chances require genuine remorse, I replied, keeping my voice level despite my racing heart. And responsibility. All I'm hearing is how unfair this is to you. Nothing about the clients whose money you took. I was going to pay it all back, he insisted. Every penny. With what? More stolen funds? More gambling on high-risk investments? Marcus fell silent, unable to answer. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence, marking the final disintegration of whatever connection had once existed between us. I think you should go, I said finally. And that's it? He asked, disbelief coloring his voice. After 12 years, you just throw me to the wolves? The wolves are of your own making, I replied. And you were perfectly willing to leave me to face cancer alone while you vacationed with your mistress. Remember that perspective. After he left, the house felt oddly peaceful despite the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Tessa found me still sitting in the kitchen, staring out at the garden where daffodils were pushing through the soil, a reminder that renewal followed even the harshest winters. You okay? She asked, setting a cup of ginger tea beside me. Better than I expected, I admitted. There's something freeing about finally seeing the truth clearly. The next day brought news we'd been anticipating. Marcus had been arrested on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. His bail was set at an amount he couldn't possibly afford in his current circumstances. Catherine called immediately. This changes our timeline, she explained. With criminal charges filed, the divorce proceedings may be delayed pending the outcome of his case. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means we push for an emergency financial separation order. Make the current division of assets permanent regardless of how long the criminal case drags on. And his debts? His legal obligations? Could those affect me? Catherine's reassurance was measured. We've taken significant protective steps already, but we'll need to be vigilant. The good news is that your financial moves preceded public knowledge of his misconduct, which strengthens our position considerably. As spring deepened into early summer, my life settled into a rhythm dictated by two parallel journeys: my ongoing cancer treatment and the legal proceedings that would ultimately sever my tie to Marcus completely. The third round of chemotherapy proved less brutal than the second, my body slowly adapting to the assault of life-saving poisons. Dr. Ramirez was cautiously optimistic about my progress, the tumors showing significant reduction in my latest scans. "You're responding remarkably well," he told me during a follow-up appointment. "Your blood work shows improvement across all markers." Is it wrong that beating cancer feels easier than surviving my marriage? I asked with a wry smile. Dr. Ramirez, who had witnessed the dissolution of my marriage alongside my treatment, shook his head. Cancer follows predictable patterns, Olivia. Human betrayal rarely does. Marcus remained in custody, unable to post bail. Through Catherine, I learned he had been assigned a public defender after exhausting his limited resources on private representation. The firm had terminated his partnership and initiated their own civil proceedings against him to recover misappropriated funds. Occasionally, I received letters from him, remorseful at times, accusatory at others, always circling back to requests for financial assistance. I read them all, but replied to none, recognizing them as echoes of a past I was steadily leaving behind. 6 weeks after his arrest, I received a visit from Detective Lauren Reyes, the lead investigator on Marcus's case. "We're building our prosecution," she explained, accepting the tea Tessa offered, "and we believe you may have information relevant to establishing the timeline of his activities." I shared everything I knew, the vacations that didn't align with his stated income, the expensive gifts, the increasing secrecy around his financial affairs. Detective Reyes listened attentively, taking careful notes. "Were you aware he had opened credit cards in your name?" she asked near the end of our conversation. The question caught me completely off guard. "No, that's impossible. I monitor my credit report regularly." Detective Reyes pulled documents from her folder. "These applications were submitted in the past month, using your social security number and personal information, but with mailing addresses directed to P.O. boxes registered to Marcus Wilson." I stared at the papers, my stomach churning with a nausea unrelated to chemotherapy. Even now, even after everything, Marcus was attempting to use me as a financial lifeline, this time through outright identity theft. "Will I be liable for these?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "No," Detective Reyes assured me. "We caught them before any charges were made. But it does add fraud and identity theft to the growing list of charges against your husband." After she left, I sat in the garden Tessa had been tenderly maintaining in my absence from outdoor activities. The summer blooms were reaching their peak, vibrant against the backdrop of green foliage. Somewhere nearby, birds called to each other in the late afternoon sunlight. "I should feel something," I told Tessa when she joined me. "Anger. Betrayal. Something. But I'm just empty." "That's not emptiness," she replied, her hand covering mine. "It's freedom. You finally cut the cord that tied your emotions to his actions." I considered her words, recognizing their truth. The news of Marcus's latest betrayal hadn't devastated me because he no longer held that power. Somewhere along this journey of illness and awakening, I had reclaimed the emotional territory he once dominated. That evening, as sunset painted our Backyard in shades of gold and amber, I wrote a letter to Marcus, the first and only one I would send during his incarceration. I know about the credit card applications, it began. This will be the last time I communicate with you directly. Our attorneys will handle any necessary interactions going forward. I don't hate you, Marcus. I don't love you anymore either. What I feel is gratitude for the clarity your betrayal provided. It forced me to find strength I didn't know I possessed. Strength that is now helping me fight cancer with the same determination I used to dismantle our fraudulent marriage. The accounts are empty because I finally recognized my own worth. The life we built was a mirage, and I'm no longer interested in chasing illusions. I wish you the courage to face your reality with honesty, something you never managed to offer. Me. I signed it simply Olivia, omitting the Wilson surname I would soon legally abandon, and sealed the envelope on a chapter of my life that was finally, irrevocably closed. August arrived with a heat wave that blanketed Westchester in a humid embrace. I sat in Dr. Ramirez's office, the air conditioning a blessed relief from the sweltering temperatures outside. He studied my latest scan results, his expression giving nothing away until he finally looked up and smiled. The tumors have reduced by nearly 70%, he announced. Your blood work is showing remarkable improvement, and your body is responding exceptionally well to the treatment protocol. Tessa, who had accompanied me to every appointment, squeezed my hand so tightly I could feel her pulse through her fingertips. So, what does that mean? I asked, afraid to voice the hope building in my chest. It means we're winning, Dr. Ramirez said simply. I'm recommending 2 more cycles of chemotherapy, followed by a maintenance regimen. If your progress continues at this rate, we could be talking about remission by Thanksgiving. Remission. The word hung in the air like a fragile promise. After months of battling both cancer and betrayal, the possibility of victory on at least one front felt almost too precious to believe. This is incredible news, Liv, Tessa said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Dr. Ramirez reviewed the remaining treatment plan, discussing potential side effects and long-term monitoring. Through it all, I sat in a state of cautious elation, allowing myself to contemplate a future that had seemed uncertain for so long. I have to ask, I said, as our appointment concluded, how much of my recovery do you attribute to medical treatment versus psychological factors? Dr. Ramirez considered the question thoughtfully. Medicine isn't an either-or proposition, Olivia. The chemotherapy attacks the cancer cells directly, but your mental state, your will to fight, your determination to eliminate toxicity from your life in all its forms, creates an internal environment conducive to healing. As we left the hospital, stepping into the wall of August heat, I felt lighter than I had in months. My body was still weak, my hair only beginning to return in soft patches, but something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer just surviving. I was beginning to reclaim my life. We should celebrate, Tessa declared, guiding me toward her car. Something small but significant. I know exactly what I want to do, I replied. That afternoon, in the cool sanctuary of Catherine Davis's office, I signed the final papers dissolving my marriage to Marcus Wilson. Due to his incarceration and the overwhelming evidence of his misconduct, the court had expedited the divorce proceedings, granting me the fresh start I so desperately needed. Congratulations, Olivia, Catherine said as I completed the last signature. You're officially free. Free and healing, I added, handing her the pen. On all fronts. Catherine had become more than just my attorney over these tumultuous months. Her fierce advocacy had transformed into something approaching friendship, her initial clinical detachment softening as she witnessed my simultaneous battles against cancer and betrayal. What's next for you? She asked, organizing the signed documents into a folder. Finishing treatment, rebuilding strength. Then, I paused, realizing I hadn't thought much beyond survival mode in months. I'm not entirely sure yet. That uncertainty is a luxury you've earned, Catherine remarked. Not knowing what comes next can be a gift when you've been trapped in circumstances beyond your control. On the drive home, Tessa and I discussed practical matters, whether to sell the house once my treatment concluded, potential career options that would accommodate my recovery schedule, even the possibility of her extending her leave of absence from Seattle. "I've been thinking about relocation anyway," she admitted as we pulled into the driveway. "Seattle's gorgeous, but the distance from you these past years has been harder than I expected." "You'd consider moving back to the East Coast?" I asked, surprised by how much I wanted her to say yes. "I'd consider moving wherever my best friend needs support," she replied simply. "Besides, remote work is the new normal. My company has already approved an indefinite work-from-home arrangement." Inside, we celebrated my double milestone, promising medical news and finalized divorce, with sparkling cider and takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, the first meal in months that didn't trigger immediate nausea. Later that evening, as twilight softened the edges of the world outside, the doorbell rang. Tessa answered it, returning with a slim envelope bearing the embossed logo of Marcus's firm. "Certified mail," she explained, handing it to me. "Required signature." I opened it cautiously, half expecting another legal complication to dampen the day's victories. Instead, I found a formal letter from Gerald Henderson, the senior partner at Marcus's firm. "Dear Mrs. Wilson," it began, a name I would soon legally change back to my maiden name, Morgan. "As the principal victim's representative in the ongoing investigation of Marcus Wilson's financial improprieties, I am writing to inform you of recent developments that may affect your financial interests." The letter went on to explain that the firm had successfully recovered a significant portion of the misappropriated funds through insurance claims and liquidation of assets directly traceable to Marcus's theft. As part of their settlement with affected clients, the firm was establishing a compensation fund for additional parties harmed by Marcus's actions. "Our investigation has revealed that several large purchases, including your primary residence renovation and vehicle acquisitions, were partially funded through misappropriated client investments," the letter continued. "While we recognize you had no knowledge of the source of these funds, the legal principle of unjust enrichment creates potential liability." My stomach dropped. After everything, the cancer, the betrayal, the painstaking financial disentanglement, was I now facing the possibility of losing what little security I'd managed to salvage? I continued reading, my hands shaking slightly. "However, in recognition of your cooperation with investigators, your status as an additional victim of Mr. Wilson's deceptions, and your ongoing medical circumstances, the firm's partners have unanimously voted to waive any claims against your personal assets. Furthermore, we have designated a portion of the recovery fund as compensation for the documented trauma and financial hardship you have endured." The final paragraph contained a figure that made me gasp aloud. Accordingly, the enclosed settlement offer of $750,000 represents our determination of appropriate compensation for the harm caused by our former partner's actions, contingent upon a standard confidentiality agreement regarding the specifics of this settlement. "What is it?" Tessa asked, alarmed by my reaction. I handed her the letter, still struggling to process its implications. After months of fighting to secure even the most basic financial stability, I was being offered not just security, but a genuine fresh start, funds that could cover the remainder of my medical expenses, provide cushion during my recovery, and eventually seed whatever new life I chose to build. "This is incredible," Tessa breathed, looking up from the letter. "But can you trust it? Is there a catch?" My years in marketing had taught me to search for hidden agendas, the unspoken motivations behind seemingly generous offers. In this case, the firm's incentives were transparent. Settling quietly with all affected parties would limit their legal exposure and public relations damage. The confidentiality clause would prevent me from discussing specifics that might encourage additional claims. "I think it's legitimate," I said slowly, "but I'll have Catherine review everything before I sign anything." The following morning, I forwarded the documents to Catherine, who responded within hours. "This is a solid offer," she confirmed during our call. "The firm is eager to contain the fallout from Marcus's actions. They've clearly calculated that compensating you generously now costs less than potential litigation later, particularly given the sympathetic narrative of a cancer patient whose husband embezzled funds." "Should I negotiate for more?" I asked, the businesswoman in me emerging from dormancy. Catherine paused. "You could, but my advice? Take it. Sign the confidentiality agreement, which only restricts discussing the settlement amount, not the underlying facts of Marcus's misconduct. Use this as seed money for your new life." After careful consideration, I followed her advice. The settlement was finalized within days. The funds transferred to an account established solely in my newly restored maiden name. The financial security it provided felt surreal after months of precarious survival. "So what now, Olivia Morgan?" Tessa asked one evening as we sat in the garden, watching fireflies emerge in the growing dusk. "The world is quite literally your oyster." I considered the question, gazing at the home that no longer felt like mine despite the memories embedded in its walls. "First, I finish treatment. Then I sell this house. Too many ghosts. After that, I'm thinking of the coast. Somewhere I can wake up to the sound of waves. East Coast? West Coast? I was thinking about Maine," I replied. "Not too far from here, but far enough. There's a little town near Portland where Dad used to take me fishing. Simple, beautiful, quiet." The plan crystallized as I spoke it aloud, not just a vague notion of escape, but a concrete vision of renewal. September brought my final round of chemotherapy, a milestone marked by a small celebration with the nurses who had become an extended family during my treatment. Dr. Ramirez presented me with my final scan results, confirming what we'd all been hoping for: remission. "There's still a long road of monitoring ahead," he cautioned, "but the immediate threat has been neutralized. Your body has responded exceptionally well." "And my prognosis?" I asked the question I'd been afraid to voice for months. "Very good," he replied with a warm smile. "Obviously, we'll need vigilant follow-up, but statistically speaking, your type of response correlates strongly with long-term survival." Survival. Once, it had been my only goal. Surviving cancer, surviving betrayal, surviving the collapse of the future I'd planned. Now, that word seemed insufficient, too small to contain the possibilities stretching before me. By October, my hair had begun to grow back in earnest, darker and surprisingly curly, a physical manifestation of my transformation. My strength returned in increments, each day bringing new energy for the tasks ahead. The house sold quickly, despite the cooling real estate market. The buyers, a young family with twin toddlers, fell in love with the sprawling backyard and updated kitchen. Watching them during the final walkthrough, the father lifting one of his daughters to show her the view from what would become her bedroom window, I felt an unexpected sense of rightness. This house deserved a family who would fill it with love and laughter, healing the psychic wounds left by its previous occupants. With the sale proceeds added to my settlement, I had more than enough to start fresh. I found a charming cottage overlooking Casco Bay, its weathered shingles and expansive deck exactly what I'd envisioned during those long nights of treatment, when I'd allowed myself to dream beyond illness. "It's perfect," Tessa declared when she saw the listing photos. "When can we see it in person?" The casual "we" caught my attention. "You're serious about relocating?" "Dead serious," she confirmed. "I've already spoken with HR about transferring to the Boston office. It's a 2-hour drive from your main paradise. Close enough for weekends, far enough for independence." The knowledge that I wouldn't be facing this next chapter alone filled me with quiet joy. Tessa had been my rock through the darkest period of my life, but our friendship had always been one of mutual support rather than dependence. Her decision to relocate nearby rather than move in maintained the healthy balance we'd always cherished. As the moving day approached, I received one final communication related to my past life, a notice from the district attorney's office informing me that Marcus had accepted a plea deal. In exchange for cooperating with authorities regarding larger financial crimes at the firm, he would serve 5 years in a minimum security facility, followed by 3 years of supervised release. I read the notice with surprising detachment, as if it concerned a character in a book I'd finished reading months ago. The man who had shared my bed, my name, and my dreams for 12 years now felt like a stranger. Someone whose story had intersected with mine, but no longer defined any part of my identity. The day before my scheduled departure for Maine, I visited the cemetery where my father was buried, placing fresh flowers beside his headstone. "I wish you could have warned me," I said softly, touching the cool granite. But then again, maybe this was a lesson I needed to learn myself. My father, with his gruff wisdom and unwavering integrity, would have seen through Marcus's charm from the beginning. He had always encouraged me to stand on my own, to build a life that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or protection. "I think you'd be proud," I continued, wiping away an unexpected tear. "Not of what happened, but of how I've handled it." The November morning of our departure dawned clear and crisp, the air carrying the first hint of winter. Tessa arrived early, her SUV already packed with her essentials for the weekend house hunting trip that would follow my settlement into the main cottage. "Ready for this?" she asked as I locked the front door of the Westchester house for the final time. I glanced back at the home that had witnessed both the height of my happiness and the depth of my despair. In another life, I might have felt melancholy about leaving, a sense of failure that my marriage hadn't endured, that the future we'd planned in this place had disintegrated. Instead, I felt only a profound sense of liberation. The woman who had moved into this house with stars in her eyes and unwavering trust in her heart no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and unflinchingly honest about what she deserved from life. "More than ready," I replied, handing the keys to the real estate agent who would deliver them to the new owners. "It's time for the next chapter." As we drove north, leaving behind the suburbs that had defined my adult life, I thought about the strange, painful journey that had brought me to this moment. Cancer had threatened my body, but ultimately strengthened my spirit. Betrayal had broken my heart, but taught me to rebuild it with stronger walls and better gates, ones that would still allow love to enter, but would no longer permit abuse to masquerade as devotion. "Penny for your thoughts?" Tessa asked as we crossed the state line into Massachusetts. "I was just thinking about how differently things turned out than I expected," I replied. "A year ago, I thought I knew exactly what my future held. Growing, old with Marcus, maybe an early retirement to travel, the predictable rhythm of a comfortable marriage." "Regrets?" she asked carefully. I considered the question, watching the autumn landscape flash past the window, trees ablaze with color, standing, strong despite the approaching winter, preparing to shed what no longer served them before growing anew in spring. "Not one," I said with absolute certainty. I lost someone who didn't truly love me. But in the process, I found myself, and she's someone I'm proud to be. As the miles disappeared beneath our wheels, carrying me toward a future I'd created, from the ashes of betrayal and illness, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the cancer that had ravaged my body, or the husband who had abandoned me at my most vulnerable, but for the revelation they had jointly provided. Sometimes, emptying your accounts, financial and emotional, was the only way to discover just how rich you could become. The Maine winter proved harsher than I remembered from childhood vacations, but there was something cleansing about the pristine snow blanketing my cottage and the fierce winds that howled off Casco Bay. I'd been in my new home for 3 months, each day a small victory in rebuilding a life entirely my own. December had passed in a flurry of settling in, arranging furniture, finding the best local shops, establishing a relationship with my new oncologist at the Portland Medical Center. January brought post-holiday quiet and the deepest cold, days when the sun seemed reluctant to rise and eager to set. Yet even in the darkness of winter, I found unexpected joy in simple routines. Morning coffee watching the seabirds navigate, ice flows, afternoon walks bundled against the cold, evenings by the fireplace with books I'd always meant to read. "You're flourishing here," Dr. Wheeler, my new oncologist, observed during my February checkup. "Your numbers are excellent. I feel stronger every day," I confirmed, no longer surprised by my body's resilience, both physically and otherwise. She smiled, closing my file. "The otherwise is often as important as the physical recovery. Many patients struggle with finding purpose after successful treatment." Purpose had indeed been on my mind. The settlement and house sale proceeds provided financial security. But at 38, I was too young and too restless for permanent retirement. My marketing expertise remained valuable, though I had little interest in returning to the corporate intensity that had defined my earlier career. The answer came unexpectedly, one snowy afternoon when I volunteered at a local cancer support center, sharing my experience with recently diagnosed patients. The director, impressed by my corporate background and personal story, approached me afterward. "We've been trying to expand our fundraising and community outreach," she explained. "Your marketing experience would be invaluable. Would you consider consulting for us?" That conversation led to others, and by March, I'd established a small consultancy focused exclusively on healthcare nonprofits. Working remotely from my cottage with flexible hours that accommodated my continuing recovery, I found satisfaction in applying my professional skills to organizations whose missions resonated deeply with my personal journey. Tessa had made good on her relocation plans, settling into a charming apartment in Boston's North End. Our weekend visits became cherished rituals, sometimes at her place amid the city's energy, more often at my coastal retreat where she claimed the guest room had better recovery vibes after her work weeks. "You seem different lately," she observed during one such visit in early April as we walked along the rocky shoreline. Spring was emerging tentatively, crocuses pushing through patches of lingering snow, the air carrying hints of thaw and renewal. "Different how?" I asked, pausing to watch a pair of loons diving offshore. "More." She searched for the word present. "Like you're fully inhabiting your life rather than just enduring it." Her observation resonated with my own sense of transformation. The focused intensity of survival, first from cancer, then from betrayal, had given way to something more expansive. I was no longer defined by what I was fighting against, but by what I was building for myself. "I think I'm finally looking forward instead of backward," I admitted. "It's been almost a year since my diagnosis. A year since everything fell apart." "And since you began rebuilding," Tessa added, linking her arm through mine as we continued our walk. That evening, a spring storm rolled in from the Atlantic, waves crashing against the seawall below my deck with magnificent fury. We sat by the fireplace, sharing a bottle of wine, my first since completing treatment, and talking about possibilities neither of us had dared discuss during those dark months of my illness. "I've been thinking about dating again," I confessed, surprising myself with the admission. Tessa raised her eyebrows but didn't seem shocked. "Anyone specific in mind?" I shook my head. "Not yet. But I've met interesting people through the foundation. Work. It just feels significant that I'm even considering it." "It's a good sign," she agreed. "Trusting again after what happened with Marcus won't be easy, but you've never been one to let fear dictate your choices." The conversation shifted to other topics, but that night, lying in bed listening to the storm gradually subside, I reflected on how far I'd come from the woman who had sat stunned in Dr. Peterson's office, clutching the edge of the examination table as shadows appeared on her scans. The next morning brought crystal clarity, the storm having washed the world clean. On impulse, I called my attorney. "Catherine? It's Olivia Morgan. I need to ask you about something that's been on my mind." An hour later, I had my answer. The confidentiality agreement I'd signed with Marcus's firm prohibited discussing the settlement amount, but placed no restrictions on sharing my personal experience. I could tell my story, all of it, if I chose to. That afternoon, I began writing. Not with publication in mind, but as a way to process the journey from diagnosis through betrayal to renewal. The words flowed with surprising ease, cathartic in their honest accounting of pain, rage, determination, and ultimately, triumph. 3 weeks and 73 pages later, I sent the manuscript to Tessa with a simple question. "Is this worth sharing?" Her response came the same day. "This isn't just worth sharing, it's necessary. How many other women need to hear that survival, on all fronts, is possible?" With her encouragement, I refined the narrative and submitted it to a women's health publication that had featured stories of cancer survivors. Their editor responded enthusiastically, suggesting it could anchor a special issue on resilience through dual crises. The article, titled "Empty Accounts, Full Recovery," was published in June, almost exactly 1 year after Marcus's arrest. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Emails, social media messages, and letters from women facing similar battles, finding hope in the knowledge that someone else had walked this path and emerged stronger. Among the flood of correspondence, one letter stood out, cream stationery with an elegant letterhead from a literary agent in New York. "Your article resonated with thousands of readers," she wrote. "There's a book here, Ms. Morgan, one that could help countless others navigate their own journeys through illness and betrayal. I'd be honored to represent you if you're interested in expanding your story." I took the letter to my favorite spot on the deck, watching the summer sun sparkle across the bay as I considered the possibility. Writing had begun as personal therapy, then evolved into a desire to reach others who might feel as isolated as I once had. A book would mean revisiting painful memories, but also sharing the hard-won wisdom they had yielded. The decision, ultimately, felt inevitable. Another step in the ongoing process of transforming trauma into purpose. That evening, I called Tessa to share the news. "A published author," she said, pride evident in her voice. "I always knew you had important things to say." "It's terrifying," I admitted. "Putting everything out there, making myself vulnerable again." "Vulnerability isn't weakness," she reminded me. "It's the source of your strength, your willingness to face what hurts and build something meaningful from it." As summer bloomed around my coastal haven, I established a new routine. Mornings devoted to writing, afternoons to my consulting work, evenings to the simple pleasures of a life reclaimed. The manuscript took shape, chapter by chapter, each one representing a stage in the journey from devastation to renewal. I heard about Marcus occasionally through legal updates, his testimony against senior partners at the firm, his adjustment to incarceration, the further unraveling of his carefully constructed facade. Each piece of news affected me less than the last, his significance in my life diminishing with each passing month. In August, exactly 1 year after my official remission diagnosis, I received my latest scan results. Clear. No evidence of disease. Dr. Wheeler scheduled my next checkup for 3 months later, the longest interval yet between appointments, a medical vote of confidence in my continued recovery, to celebrate both milestones, health and the completed. First draft of my manuscript, I hosted a small gathering at my cottage. Tessa came from Boston, Catherine made the trip from Connecticut, and new friends from my Maine community joined to raise glasses as the sun set over Casco Bay. "To empty bank accounts," Tessa toasted with characteristic irreverence, "and the full life they made possible." We laughed, the joke no longer carrying any sting, transformed like so much else by the passage of time and the power of reclamation. Later, as the gathering wound down and guests departed, I found myself alone on the deck, watching stars emerge over the darkening water. A year ago, standing on this same spot, newly arrived in my refuge by the sea, I had felt primarily relief, grateful to have escaped both disease and deception, but still haunted by their shadows. Now, I recognized the fundamental shift in my perspective. I had stopped defining myself as a survivor of cancer and betrayal. Those experiences, profound as they were, had become chapters in my story rather than its title. What stretched before me now was not just recovery, but discovery, of capabilities I hadn't tested, joys I hadn't anticipated, connections I hadn't yet formed. The accounts Marcus had emptied, financial and emotional, had forced me to discover resources within myself I might never have known existed. In trying to leave me with nothing, he had inadvertently set me on the path to everything that mattered. The transformation from cancer patient to published author happened with surprising speed. By November, 18 months after my initial diagnosis, I was reviewing final page proofs for Empty Accounts, a memoir of healing from cancer and betrayal. The publisher had fast-tracked the project after early manuscript readings generated enthusiastic responses, positioning the book for a spring release. "They're talking about a 10-city tour," my agent, Diane, explained during our weekly call. "Starting in New York, then Boston, Chicago, all the major markets. The pre-orders are already impressive." I glanced out my cottage window at the November rain lashing against the glass, Casco Bay a churning gray beyond. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of exposure," I admitted. Writing the story was one thing. Standing in front of rooms full of strangers discussing it is quite another. "Your story resonates because it's both deeply personal and universally relevant," Diane replied. "Think of the tour not as exposing yourself, but as creating space for others to recognize their own strength through your experience." She had a point. The hundreds of messages I'd received after my article was published confirmed that my journey echoed through many lives. Women fighting illness while also navigating relationship betrayal. Partners abandoned during vulnerable moments. Survivors seeking purpose beyond mere recovery. "I'll consider it," I promised. "Let me get through the holidays first." The winter holidays approached with a gentleness I hadn't anticipated. Last Christmas had been a blur of settling into my new home, still physically weak from treatment and emotionally raw from divorce. This year felt different, a celebration of milestones reached rather than ordeals survived. Tessa arrived 2 days before Christmas, bringing her characteristic energy and a car full of decorations. "Your place needs serious holiday intervention," she declared, unloading boxes of lights, ornaments, and greenery. "I was going for understated elegance," I protested, eyeing the collection. "You were going for, I'm still recovering from cancer and divorce," she corrected fondly. "This year, we're celebrating properly." She was right, of course. I'd been hesitant to fully embrace celebration, as if doing so might tempt fate. But my most recent checkup had confirmed continuing remission, my book was moving toward publication, and my consulting business had grown to require part-time administrative support. Life had expanded beyond survival mode, and it was time my holidays reflected that reality. We spent Christmas Eve decorating a small pine tree I'd selected from a local farm, hanging ornaments with no history or painful associations, all new, all chosen specifically for this fresh chapter. Tessa had thoughtfully brought a few treasures from my childhood that she'd rescued during the move. My father's hand-carved wooden star, the ceramic angel my mother had painted the year before. Her death. "For continuity," she explained, handing me these precious links to my past. Not everything from before needed to be left behind. On Christmas morning, we exchanged gifts by the fireplace, then bundled up for a brisk walk along the winter shore. The beach was deserted, waves crashing against ice-rimmed rocks, seagulls wheeling overhead in the crystalline air. "I have news," Tessa announced as we turned back toward the cottage, cheeks flushed with cold. "I've been offered a transfer to Portland. The firm is expanding their New England operations, and they need someone to establish the main office." "Portland? Here?" I stopped walking, stunned by the possibility of having my closest friend just 30 minutes away instead of 2 hours south in Boston. She nodded, her smile as bright as the winter sun. "I'd be based downtown. Could start as early as February. But Boston, your apartment, your life there, was always transitional," she finished. "You know me, Liv. I'm not a big city person at heart. Portland has everything I need on a more manageable scale." The news felt like a culmination of the year's blessings: health, purpose, and now the proximity of my dearest friend. We spent the remainder of the holiday planning her relocation, scouting potential apartments online, imagining weekend hikes and summer sailing once she was settled nearby. January brought a fresh round of changes. My literary agent negotiated a speaking engagement at a major women's health conference in New York, a trial run, she suggested, before committing to the full book tour. The publisher arranged media training sessions conducted remotely from my cottage, teaching me how to handle interview questions about sensitive aspects of my experience. "You'll inevitably be asked about Marcus," the media coach explained during one session. "People will want to know if you've had contact, if he's read the book, how he's responded." "The truth is simple enough," I replied. "We have no contact. Beyond what's legally required. His current circumstances don't factor into my life anymore." "Perfect," she nodded approvingly. Acknowledging the past without being defined by it. As the February conference date approached, I received an unexpected email from Gerald Henderson, the senior partner at Marcus's former firm who had arranged my settlement. "Dear Ms. Morgan," it began, using my restored maiden name. "I hope this message finds you well. I recently became aware of your forthcoming book through publishing industry contacts. While our settlement agreement places no restrictions on your sharing your personal story, I wanted to offer the firm's cooperation, should you require any factual clarification regarding the financial aspects of your experience." The offer seemed genuine, a professional courtesy rather than an attempt at control or censorship. I responded with formal thanks and a promise to have my publisher's legal team reach out if any issues arose. A week later, a more disturbing communication arrived, a letter from Marcus, forwarded by Catherine from his correctional facility in Pennsylvania. "I understand you're publishing a book about our marriage," he wrote in the familiar handwriting that once filled loving notes, but now seemed like artifacts from another lifetime. "While I cannot prevent you from telling your version of events, I ask that you consider the impact on my eventual rehabilitation and reintegration into society. I have served nearly 2 years of my sentence and am participating in extensive rehabilitation programs. The person I was during our marriage no longer exists." Catherine had attached her own note. "You have no legal obligation to respond or alter your publication plans. His rehabilitation is his responsibility, not yours." I set the letter aside, unsettled by this echo from my past, but determined not to let it disrupt my present focus. Marcus's attempt to control the narrative, to position himself as the reformed offender whose future I might damage, was painfully familiar. The manipulation was subtler than before, but recognizable nonetheless. After careful consideration, I drafted a response, reviewing it with both Catherine and my publisher's legal team before sending it. "I acknowledge your concerns," I wrote, "but my book is my truthful account of experiences that profoundly affected my life. It focuses primarily on resilience and recovery rather than assigning blame. I wish you well in your rehabilitation efforts and hope you find a constructive path forward when your sentence concludes. Brief, factual, devoid of either anger or false compassion. A communication that closed the door on further engagement without unnecessary cruelty." Like so many aspects of my recovery, it felt like navigating a narrow path between righteous rage and premature forgiveness, finding instead a middle ground of clear-eyed acceptance. The New York conference arrived on a snowy February weekend. Standing backstage before my presentation, I felt a moment of panic. Not about public speaking, which had been part of my marketing career, but about the vulnerability of sharing my most painful experiences with 500 strangers. "You've got this," Tessa whispered beside me, having insisted on accompanying me for moral support. "Just speak your truth. The rest will follow." The stage lights were blinding as I stepped to the podium, my prepared remarks suddenly seeming inadequate. Instead of starting with my diagnosis as planned, I found myself sharing a different moment. 2 years ago, I began. I stood in my kitchen as my husband left for what he claimed was a business trip, unaware that he was actually heading to a beachfront villa with another woman. I was scheduled to begin my second round of chemotherapy the following week. At that moment, I didn't know about his destination, his companion, or even the full extent of my cancer. I knew only that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage, just as something had shifted within my body. Both were fighting for survival, though only one would ultimately endure. For the next 40 minutes, I traced my parallel journeys through illness and betrayal, weaving together the medical challenges and personal revelations that had ultimately led to healing on all fronts. The audience remained rapt, many openly wiping away tears as I described both the darkest moments and the unexpected gifts that emerged from them. I stand before you today not as a victim of cancer or infidelity, I concluded, but as someone who discovered that empty bank accounts, both financial and emotional, created space for new deposits of strength, wisdom, and authenticity. Our greatest challenges don't define us. How we respond to them does. The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming. More significant were the dozens of women who approached afterward, sharing whispered fragments of their own struggles, expressing gratitude for the voice I'd given to experiences often suffered in isolation. "You've found your true calling," Diane observed as we celebrated over dinner that evening. "The book tour isn't just a marketing exercise, it's an opportunity to create healing connections." With that perspective, I embraced the full schedule of appearances that would follow the book's April release. As winter yielded to early spring, final preparations for publication coincided with Tessa's successful relocation to Portland. She found a charming apartment in the Old Port District, close enough for weekly dinners, but distant enough to maintain our independent lives. March brought another milestone, the 2-year anniversary of my cancer diagnosis. Dr. Wheeler marked the occasion with a comprehensive evaluation. "Your recovery continues to exceed expectations," she noted, reviewing my latest scan results. "At this point, I'm comfortable moving to biannual checkups rather than quarterly." "What about long-term prognosis?" I asked the question that had hovered at the edges of my consciousness for months. "In medical terms, we use 5 years as the benchmark for discussions of cure rather than remission," she explained. "But given your response to treatment and continued excellent health markers, I'm very optimistic about your long-term outlook." The news solidified my sense of a threshold crossed, from a life defined by survival to one characterized by possibility. As I drove home along the coastal road, spring sunshine glinting off the bay, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for this unexpected second act. April arrived with soft rains and the first green shoots in my garden. The official publication date of my memoir coincided with a profile in a national women's magazine, which drove the book onto bestseller lists within its first week of release. "They're adding cities to the tour," Diane reported excitedly. "Seattle, San Francisco, Dallas. Your story is resonating coast to coast." The night before departing for the tour, I hosted a small gathering at my cottage. Tessa, new friends from the coastal community, colleagues from the Cancer Support Foundation where I continued to volunteer. As conversations flowed around me, I slipped outside to the deck, needing a moment alone to absorb the journey that had brought me here. The April evening was mild, stars emerging above the darkening water. In the distance, a lighthouse began its rhythmic sweeping, a beam of clarity cutting through gathering shadows. It struck me as the perfect metaphor for what I hoped my book might offer others. Not a map to identical destinations, but illumination, during the darkest passages of their own journeys. Planning your escape from your own party? Tessa's voice came from behind me as she joined me at the railing. Just taking a moment, I replied. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed. In 2 years. For better, she noted, bumping my shoulder gently with hers. Unquestionably. But there are still moments when I wonder about the road not taken. The life Marcus and I might have had if he'd been the person I thought he was. If cancer hadn't revealed the truth beneath the facade. Tessa considered this thoughtfully. Would you go back if you could? To that life? That marriage? Knowing what you know now about what's possible on your own terms? The question deserved serious reflection. There had been genuine happiness in my marriage once, or at least the appearance of it. Financial security, social standing, the comfort of familiar patterns, all sacrificed in the upheaval that followed my diagnosis. Yet when I imagined returning to that life, even an idealized version without betrayal, I felt a curious constriction, as if stepping back into clothes I'd outgrown, too tight across shoulders that had broadened through carrying my own weight. No, I said finally, the certainty of it settling into my bones. What I have now, this life I've built, this person I've become, it's more authentic than anything I had before. More mine. Tessa nodded, unsurprised. The empty accounts turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to you. Not the cancer. Though, I clarified, I won't go so far as to call that a gift. Fair enough, she laughed. But you took what tried to destroy you and transformed it into something powerful. That's the story people respond to. Not just survival, but transfiguration. We rejoined the gathering inside, where conversations and laughter created the warm heart of a home truly lived in. These connections, some new, some weathered by shared trials, formed the richest deposits in my once emptied emotional accounts. Later, after guests had departed and Tessa had returned to her apartment in town, I sat alone by the fireplace, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here and the new chapter beginning with tomorrow's departure. The book tour would take me across the country, introducing me to countless strangers whose lives might intersect with mine through shared experiences of illness, betrayal, recovery, and renewal. My phone chimed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Opening it, I found a message from Adrienne Taylor, Marcus's former mistress whom I hadn't heard from since her warning visit 2 years earlier. Saw your book announcement. Ordered my copy today. I want you to know I'm clean of the past, too. New. Job in Chicago. Engaged to someone wonderful who knows my full history. Some betrayals lead to better paths for everyone involved. Safe travels on your tour. I smiled at this unexpected epilogue. This reminder that healing extended in directions I couldn't have anticipated. Adrienne had been both accomplice and victim in Marcus's deceptions, finding her own way forward just as I had found mine. My response was simple. Thank you. Wishing you happiness in your new beginning. Setting down the phone, I gazed around. The cottage that had sheltered my transformation from shell-shocked cancer patient to confident survivor. The home I'd created reflected the woman I'd become. Warm but strong, welcoming but self-sufficient, anchored but open to new horizons. Tomorrow would begin a new adventure, sharing my story with those who might find in it echoes of their own, struggles and possibilities for their own renewal. But tonight belonged to quiet acknowledgement of the journey completed, from devastation to wholeness, from emptiness to abundance. As I climbed the stairs to bed, fatigue mingling with anticipation for the weeks ahead, I remembered something my father had often said during the fishing trips of my childhood. Sometimes you have to lose everything you brought to find what you came for. In the empty accounts Marcus left behind, financial, emotional, future plans erased in an instant, I had indeed found what perhaps I had always been seeking: my most authentic self, capable of weathering storms I once would have considered unendurable, creating connection through shared vulnerability, and building a life measured not by what had been taken, but by what had been discovered in its place. That, ultimately, was the message I hoped my book would convey. Not that betrayal and illness were secretly blessings, but that within our response, to them lay the seeds of transformation more powerful than any loss. The accounts that truly mattered couldn't be emptied by another's actions. They could only be filled by our own. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.